Sometimes life strips away everything you thought mattered until all you have left is hope. Cole McBride had lost his ranch, his family, and his faith in tomorrow when he inherited a broken-down junk station and an old dog in Cedar Ridge. Inheritance seemed like another cruel joke, a pile of rusted metal, unpaid debts, and a dog that wouldn't stop digging by the foundation. Cole figured he'd sell what he could and move on like he always did, but that old dog had found something that had been buried for decades. Gold rush treasure worth $20 million. Word spreads fast in a frontier town. Outlaws, corrupt officials, and desperate men all want the same thing. What happens when a broken cowboy and his loyal dog become the only thing standing between? A fortune and the most dangerous people in the territory. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on Cedar Ridge as Cole McBride's weathered boots crunched against the dusty main street. His horse, a tired mare named Belle, plodded along with the same weary resignation that had settled into Cole's bones over the past 3 years. The town looked like every other frontier settlement he'd drifted through, a collection of sun-bleached wooden buildings, false fronts trying to make storefronts look grander than they were, and the ever-present smell of dust, horse sweat, and human ambition gone stale. Cole pulled the crumpled inheritance letter from his vest pocket for the 5th time that morning. The lawyer's neat handwriting had faded some in the weeks since he'd received it, but the words remained clear enough. Property of the late Ezra McBride, including trading post, outbuildings, and 1 canine companion, hereby bequeathed to Cole McBride, sole surviving relative. Ezra. Cole barely remembered his distant cousin, a gruff man who'd shown up at family gatherings maybe twice in Cole's childhood, always talking about his grand plans for making it rich on the frontier. Now those grand plans had apparently amounted to a junk station and a dog. The inheritance sat at the far end of town, past the last respectable business, and well into the territory where broken dreams went to rust. Cole tied Belle to a crooked hitching post and surveyed what was now, legally speaking, his property. The main building leaned slightly to the left, its wooden siding weathered to a uniform gray that matched the surrounding landscape. A hand-painted sign reading McBride's Trading Post hung askew above the door, one corner dangling from a single nail. The windows were so thick with dust and grime that Cole couldn't see inside. Scattered around the property were the remnants of what might once have been an ambitious business venture. Rusted wagon wheels leaned against a collapsing shed. Broken tools, bent horseshoes, and pieces of harness equipment lay in haphazard piles, slowly being reclaimed by the persistent frontier dust. A water trough sat bone dry, its wooden sides warped and cracked from years under the relentless sun. The only sign of life was a dog. The animal emerged from the shade of the building's overhang with the cautious dignity of something that had learned not to expect much from humans, but hadn't quite given up hope. He was a large, mixed-breed creature, part shepherd, part something else entirely, with a thick coat that had once been black, but now showed streaks of silver around his muzzle and ears. His brown eyes held an intelligence that made Cole pause. In his assessment of the property, "You must be my inheritance," Cole said softly, crouching down and extending his hand. The dog approached slowly, sniffed once, then sat down just close enough to be sociable, but far enough to maintain his dignity. "What do you think, old fellow? Think this place is worth keeping?" The dog, Rusty, according to the letter, tilted his head as if seriously considering the question. Then he stood, walked to a spot near the foundation of the main building and began to dig. "Already got yourself a project, do you?" Cole watched as Rusty's powerful paws sent dirt flying. The dog worked with the focused intensity of something that knew exactly what it was looking for. "Well, I suppose that's more ambition than I've had in months." Cole pushed open the door to the trading post, wincing as the hinges protested with a screech that sent a pair of crows flying from the roof. Inside, the air was thick and still, heavy with the smell of old leather and something that might have been tobacco or might have been disappointment. Dust motes danced in the shafts of sunlight that managed to penetrate the grimy windows. The interior told the story of a man who'd started with big dreams and gradually settled for smaller ones. Shelves lined the walls, mostly empty now except for a few items that previous scavengers hadn't deemed worth taking. A set of rusty spurs, some leather scraps, a few bottles of patent medicine with faded labels. Behind the counter sat a ledger book, its pages yellowed with age. Cole opened it and read Ezra's careful entries, chronicling the slow decline of his business. Fewer customers each month, smaller purchases, longer periods between sales. But it was the deed that caught Cole's attention. The legal document sat in a wooden box behind the counter, along with a few other papers that looked official. Cole unfolded the deed carefully, studying the property boundaries described in the flowery legal language of territorial law. According to the document, Ezra hadn't just owned the trading post and the small plot it sat on. The property extended much further than Cole had realized, nearly 200 acres stretching back toward the foothills, including water rights, to a small creek that ran along the northern boundary. 200 acres. In his darkest moments over the past 3 years, Cole had dreamed of having that much land again. After losing the family ranch to creditors following his father's death, after watching helplessly as everything his family had built over 2 generations was sold off piece by piece to pay debts he'd never fully understood, the idea of owning land again had seemed impossible. "Well, Belle," he said to his horse through the open door, "maybe Cousin Ezra wasn't as foolish as the family always claimed." Outside, Rusty continued his determined excavation. The dog had managed to dig a hole, nearly 3 feet deep, his tail wagging with the satisfaction of productive labor. Cole walked over and peered into the hole, expecting to find the remains of some long-buried bone, or perhaps an old horseshoe. Instead, he saw the edge of something that definitely didn't belong in the ground. Cole knelt beside the hole and used his hands to carefully brush away more dirt. What emerged was a piece of metal, not rusted iron like everything else around the property, but something that gleamed dully even under its coating of earth. He worked it free and held it up to the light. It was a brass compass, old but well made, with intricate engravings around the rim. The face was cracked, and the needle spun wildly when he moved it, but there was something about the craftsmanship that suggested this had been an expensive piece in its day. More intriguingly, there appeared to be something wrapped around the base, a piece of paper or leather that had been protected from the elements by being pressed tight against the metal. Rusty watched intently as Cole carefully unwrapped what turned out to be a small piece of oiled cloth. Inside was a fragment of paper, torn along one edge as if it had been part of something larger. The paper was old, but the ink remained clear enough to read, "The third marker lies due west of the foundation stone. 20 paces to the lightning struck. A pine, J. Stone, 1847. Cole read the fragment twice, his heart beginning to beat a little faster. J. Stone, 1847. The height of the gold rush, when men had poured into this territory, chasing dreams of easy wealth. Some had found it, most had died trying, a few had found it and then disappeared, taking their secrets with them. "What do you think, Rusty?" Cole asked, showing the paper to the dog. "Think your old master Ezra knew about this when he bought the place?" Rusty's response was to return to his hole and resume digging with even greater enthusiasm. Cole stood and looked around the property with new eyes. 200 acres of apparently worthless land that might not be worthless after all. A dog that seemed to know exactly where to dig. And now, a mysterious note from 1847, mentioning markers and foundations, and someone named J. Stone. For the first time in 3 years, Cole felt something that might have been hope stirring in his chest. It was a dangerous feeling. Hope had led him into bad decisions before, had made him trust the wrong people and believe in promises that turned out to be lies. But as he watched Rusty work with such determined purpose, as he held the brass compass and studied the cryptic note, Cole began to think that maybe his luck was finally about to change. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made him look up. 3 riders were coming down the dusty street at an easy pace, but something about their posture suggested they weren't just passing through. The lead rider was a big man with a badge pinned to his vest, the local sheriff most likely. The other 2 looked like the kind of men who made their living with their guns rather than their backs. Cole quickly pocketed the compass and the note, then casually kicked some dirt back into Rusty's hole. Whatever he'd inherited here, whatever. Secrets lay buried on this property. He had the feeling that the fewer people who knew about it, the better off he'd be. "Afternoon," the sheriff called out as the 3 riders approached. He was a man in his 50s, with grey hair and the kind of steady gaze that came from years of dealing with trouble. "You'd be Cole McBride, I'm guessing." Heard Ezra's cousin was coming to claim the property. "That's right," Cole replied, standing and brushing the dirt from his hands. "Sheriff Hawkins, Tom Hawkins." The sheriff dismounted and extended his hand. His grip was firm, his manner friendly enough, but Cole noticed how his eyes took in every detail of the property. "These are my deputies, Miller and Carson. We like to welcome new residents to Cedar Ridge. Make sure they understand how things work around here." The 2 deputies remained mounted, their hands resting casually near their weapons. Neither looked particularly welcoming. "I appreciate that, Sheriff," Cole said carefully, "though I'm not sure yet how long I'll be staying. Still trying to figure out if there's anything worth salvaging from this place." "Oh, I think you might be surprised," Hawkins said, his tone remaining conversational. "Ezra always claimed this property had potential. Of course, poor old Ezra claimed a lot of things over the years. Man had a tendency to see gold where there was only fool's pyrite." There was something in the way Hawkins said it that made Cole's instincts prickle. The sheriff was fishing for something, trying to gauge how much Cole might know about his inheritance. "Well," Cole said with a shrug, "so far all I've found is a leaky roof and a dog with a digging problem." Hawkins glanced at Rusty, who had emerged from his hole to eye the newcomers with obvious suspicion. "That's old Rusty. Good dog, that one." Ezra always said he was smarter than most people, had a way of finding things. Finding things. Cole kept his voice casual, but his hand moved instinctively to the pocket containing the compass. "Oh, you know how dogs are, always digging up old bones, buried horseshoes, that sort of thing." Hawkins smiled, but his eyes remained sharp. "Nothing valuable, of course. If there was anything of real worth on this property, Ezra would have found it years ago." The sheriff remounted his horse, but before leaving, he leaned forward in his saddle. "Word of advice, McBride. This territory can be dangerous for a man on his own. Lots of drifters passing through, some of them not too particular about respecting property rights. You might want to consider selling out, heading somewhere more civilized." "I'll keep that in mind," Cole replied. After the 3 men rode away, Cole stood in the gathering dusk and watched their figures disappear into the distance. Rusty came over and sat beside him, both of them looking down the empty street. "What do you think, old fellow?" Cole asked quietly. "Think the good sheriff was just being neighborly?" Rusty's low growl suggested he had his own opinion about Sheriff Hawkins and his deputies. Cole looked down at the dog, then at the property that was now legally his, then at the endless expanse of frontier territory stretching away in all directions. For 3 years, he'd been drifting from town to town, taking whatever work he could find, trying to forget the life he'd lost. Now, for the first time since his world had collapsed, he had land again. It might be worthless, broken-down land, with a leaky roof and a pile of debts, but it was his, and if the compass and the note meant what he was beginning to suspect they might mean, it could be worth a great deal more than anyone realized. "Well, Rusty," he said, scratching the dog behind the ears, "I guess we'd better figure out what old Jay Stone buried on our property. But something tells me we're going to want to be very careful about who else finds out what we're looking for." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Cole McBride made the first decision he'd made in years that felt like it might actually matter. He was going to stay. He was going to find out what secrets this property held, and he was going to be very careful about who he trusted along the way. The broken cowboy and his inherited dog had found each other. Now they just had to survive long enough to find out what fortune had brought them together. Cole woke before dawn to the sound of Rusty's insistent digging. The dog had been at it for 3 days now, working methodically around the foundation of the trading post, with the patience of something that knew exactly what it was looking for. Each morning, Cole would find new holes scattered across the property, each one precisely excavated and then abandoned once Rusty determined it held nothing of interest. This morning was different. Cole stepped outside in his long underwear and boots to find Rusty standing perfectly still beside his latest excavation, his tail rigid with excitement. The hole was deeper than the others, nearly 4 feet down and wider. Something pale gleamed in the bottom. "What have you got there, boy?" Cole knelt beside the hole and reached down, his fingers closing around what felt like oiled leather. He pulled it free, brushing away the clinging earth to reveal a wrapped bundle about the size of his fist. Inside the leather wrapping was a piece of paper, much larger than the fragment he'd found with the compass. This one was a complete document, though torn and stained with age. At the top, in faded but still legible ink, were the words, "Property of Jeremiah Stone, Prospector, 1847. Below that was what appeared to be a hand-drawn map. Cole carried the document inside and spread it carefully on the counter, using his water basin to clean his hands before touching the fragile paper. The map showed the local terrain with surprising accuracy. The creek, the foothills, even the spot where Cedar Ridge now sat, though it was marked only as Settlement 3 Buildings. But it was the symbols scattered across the map that made Cole's breath catch. X marks, dozens of them connected by dotted lines and accompanied by cryptic notations. First cache, dried goods and tools. Second cache, silver and papers. Main deposit, gold and deeds, safe until spring thaw. And at the bottom of the map, in a different hand and darker ink, was a note that made Cole's blood run cold. "Stone's dead. Garrett's boys got him at Miller's Creek. Treasures still buried. Need to move it before they come back. E.M. Ezra McBride." His cousin had known about this treasure all along. Cole studied the map more carefully, trying to match the landmarks to what he knew of his property. The main deposit symbol sat directly beneath what appeared to be a representation of the trading post's foundation. According to the map, there was a fortune buried literally under his feet. The sound of approaching horses made him quickly fold the map and slip it into his pocket alongside the compass. Through the grimy window, he could see 4 riders approaching at a leisurely pace. These weren't Sheriff Hawkins and his deputies. These men had the look of trouble about them even at a distance. Cole stepped onto the porch, his hand instinctively checking the position of his Colt revolver. The riders pulled up just outside his property line, their horses snorting and stamping impatiently. The leader was a thin man, with pale eyes and a scraggly beard, wearing a black hat that had seen better days. The others looked like the kind of men who hired their guns out to whoever paid best. "Morning," the leader called out, his voice carrying a false friendliness. "You'd be the new owner, I reckon. Name's Jake Garrett." The name hit Cole like a physical blow. Garrett's boys, the same gang mentioned in the note on the map, the men who had killed Jeremiah Stone over 30 years ago. "Cole McBride," he replied, carefully, not moving from the porch. Behind him, he could hear Rusty's low growl. "Heard you inherited this place from old Ezra," Garrett continued, his pale eyes scanning the property. "Shame about Ezra, good man. We had some business dealings with him over the years." "That so?" "Oh, yes. See, Ezra owed us some money. Nothing too substantial, mind you, but a debt's a debt." Garrett's smile never reached his eyes. "Now that he's passed on, I reckon that debt transfers to you." Cole kept his expression neutral. "I don't recall seeing any mention of debts to you in the inheritance papers." "Well now, that's the thing about certain kinds of business arrangements." One of Garrett's men spoke up, a heavy-set brute with scars across his knuckles. They don't always get written down in official papers. How much? Cole asked. $5,000, Garrett said casually, as if discussing the weather. $5,000. More money than Cole had seen in his entire life. More than the trading post and everything on it would be worth even in good condition. That's a substantial sum for a man who ran a failed junk station, Cole observed. Garrett's false smile flickered slightly. Ezra had other interests. Man was always poking around in places he shouldn't have been, digging up things that didn't belong to him. Course, we're reasonable men. We understand you might need some time to raise the funds. How much time? 1 week ought to do it. Garrett turned his horse slightly, preparing to leave. Oh, and McBride. I'd be careful about doing any digging around here. This old territory's got a way of swallowing people up who go looking for things that ain't rightfully theirs. After the 4 men rode away, Cole stood on his porch for a long time, thinking. $5,000 in 1 week. It was impossible, of course. Even if he sold everything he owned, including Bell and his guns, he might raise $50. The demand was clearly meant to be impossible to meet. But why? What did Jake Garrett really want? The answer was obvious, and it was sitting in Cole's pocket. Somehow, Garrett knew about the treasure. Maybe he'd known all along. Maybe he'd been the one pressuring Ezra for information before the old man died. The debt story was just an excuse, a legal-sounding reason to take over the property when Cole inevitably failed to pay. Cole walked back to where Rusty was still guarding his excavation site. The dog looked up at him with intelligent brown eyes, as if asking what they were going to do next. "Well, boy," Cole said quietly, "looks like we've got ourselves a situation. Question is, do we run or do we fight? Running would be the smart thing. Pack up, ride out, and let Garrett have the property and whatever was buried on it." Cole had been running for 3 years now. What was one more town, one more failed chance? But as he looked around at the property that was legally his, as he felt the weight of the map and compass in his pocket, Cole realized he was tired of running. For the first time since he'd lost everything, he had something that might be worth fighting for. He spent the rest of the day carefully studying Jeremiah Stone's map, matching landmarks and trying to decipher the prospector's cryptic notations. The main deposit was definitely somewhere on his property, probably close to the trading post's foundation. But the map also showed several smaller caches scattered across the territory, marked with notes about supplies, silver, and papers. What kind of papers would a prospector bury alongside his treasure? As the sun began to set, Cole made his decision. He was going to find Jeremiah Stone's treasure before Jake Garrett could take it from him. He owed that much to his cousin Ezra, who had apparently spent years protecting the secret. He owed it to himself, after 3 years of drifting and defeat. And he owed it to Rusty, who seemed to understand better than anyone where the real treasure lay buried. That night, Cole sat on his porch with the dog beside him, watching the stars emerge in the clear desert sky. Somewhere out there, Jake Garrett and his men were planning their next move. Somewhere in town, Sheriff Hawkins was probably wondering how much the new arrival knew about his property's secrets. And somewhere beneath Cole's feet lay a fortune that had been waiting 30 years for someone brave enough to claim it. Cole McBride had been many things in his life. A rancher's son, a soldier, a drifter, a man who had lost everything that mattered to him. Tomorrow, he would start the process of becoming something else entirely, a man who refused to run from his destiny. The broken cowboy was about to discover that sometimes the best way to fix your life is to dig up someone else's buried dreams and make them your own. The next morning brought more than just sunrise. It brought discovery. Cole had been awake since before dawn, poring over Jeremiah Stone's map by lamplight, when Rusty's excited barking drew him outside. The dog had returned to his excavation site and was pawing frantically at something embedded in the earthen wall of the hole. Cole grabbed a shovel and carefully worked around whatever had caught Rusty's attention. What emerged was a wooden box, small but solid, wrapped in the same kind of oiled leather that had protected the map. Inside, Cole found something that made his hands tremble as he lifted it into the morning light. A leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but perfectly preserved. The first page bore an inscription in careful script, the private record of Jeremiah Stone, prospector and honest man. If you are reading this, then I am likely dead, and my secrets are yours to keep or share as your conscience dictates. Cole settled onto his porch steps and began to read. What unfolded was the story of a man who had struck gold in the territory during the height of the rush, but who had quickly discovered that finding treasure was far easier than keeping it. Safe March 15, 1847. The Garrett gang grows bolder by the day. They know I found the mother lode up in Devil's Canyon, but they don't know where I've hidden it. Thank God for that. Jake Garrett would kill his own mother for a tenth of what I've pulled from that claim. April 3rd, 1847. Had to abandon the canyon. Garrett's men were watching every approach. Managed to move most of the gold under cover of a spring storm. The new hiding place is safer, but it won't stay secret forever. Need to make arrangements, just in case. April 20th, 1847. Met with the territorial agent today. The papers are signed and buried with the main cash. If something happens to me, at least the legal claims will survive. The land grants alone are worth more than the gold. Mineral rights to half the territory. Future generations will thank me, assuming they're smart enough to understand what they're looking at. Cole paused in his reading, his heart pounding. Land grants, mineral rights. This wasn't just about buried gold. Jeremiah Stone had apparently secured legal claims to vast tracts of territory, documents that would be worth millions in today's world. He continued reading, becoming absorbed. In Stone's increasingly paranoid entries, the prospector had clearly known his time was running out. The later entries spoke of elaborate precautions, coded messages, and careful preparations for what seemed inevitable. May 12th, 1847. They're closing in. Can feel it in my bones. Have prepared the final hiding place and scattered the markers as planned. If I don't survive, maybe someone honest will find what I've hidden. The compass points true, not to magnetic north, but to justice. Remember that the compass points true. Cole pulled out the brass compass he'd found and studied it more carefully. The needle did indeed spin wildly when pointed north, but when he oriented it according to the markings on Stone's map, it steadied and pointed consistently in one direction, toward the back corner of his property where a lightning-struck pine tree stood silhouetted against the morning sky. Cole was still studying the journal when the sound of a wagon approaching made him look up. A woman was driving a small cart loaded with supplies, her auburn hair pinned back in a practical style. Beneath a sun-faded bonnet, she appeared to be about his age, with the kind of steady composure that spoke of someone accustomed to managing her own affairs. Mr. McBride? She pulled the wagon to a stop near his porch. I'm Rebecca Hayes, the school teacher. I brought you some supplies, bread, coffee, a few other necessities. Thought you might need them while you're settling in. Cole quickly closed the journal and stood, suddenly aware that he probably looked like he'd been sleeping rough. That's very kind of you, Miss Hayes, though I should mention I'm not sure how long I'll be staying. Please call me Rebecca. She climbed down from the wagon with practiced ease. And I have a feeling you might be here longer than you think. There was something in her tone that made Cole study her more carefully. Rebecca Hayes had intelligent eyes and the kind of direct gaze that suggested she wasn't easily fooled. What makes you say that? Because you're the first person to take possession of this property who seems to understand what he's inherited. She began unloading supplies from her wagon, moving with efficient purpose. Ezra spent years trying to find buyers, but everyone who looked at the place saw only the surface, a broken-down trading post and worthless land. And you think there's more to it? Rebecca paused in her work and looked directly at him. I think Ezra McBride was a lot smarter than people gave him credit for, and I think he left this property to you for reasons that go beyond simple family obligation. Cole felt a chill run down his spine. How much did she know? I also think. Rebecca continued. that you're going to need allies in this town, more than you might realize. Allies against what? Against men like Jake Garrett, for starters. She finished unloading the supplies and turned to face him fully. He and his gang have been circling this property like vultures ever since Ezra died. They tried to pressure him into selling for years, claimed he owed them money that everyone in town knew he didn't owe. You seem to know a lot about my business, Miss Hayes. It's a small town, Mr. McBride, and I make it my business to know when good people are being threatened by bad ones. Her expression softened slightly. Ezra was a friend. He helped fund the school when the territorial government wouldn't. If there's something on this property that he wanted protected, then I want to help protect it. Cole studied her face, looking for any sign of deception or hidden motive. What he saw was sincerity, intelligence, and the kind of quiet strength that suggested Rebecca Hayes would be a valuable ally indeed. Suppose, he said carefully, hypothetically speaking, that there was something of value hidden on this property, something that dangerous men might kill for. Would you still want to be involved? Especially then, she replied without hesitation. Cole made a decision that would change both their lives. He invited Rebecca inside and showed her Jeremiah Stone's journal. She read in fascination, occasionally asking questions about the map and the compass. When she finished, she looked up with excitement and concern warring in her expression. "This is extraordinary," she said. "But you understand what it means, don't you? If Jake Garrett suspects even a fraction of what's buried here, he already suspects. He came by yesterday with 3 of his men, claiming Ezra owed them $5,000. $5,000? Rebecca's eyes widened. That's preposterous. Ezra never had that kind of money to borrow. Which means they're using it as an excuse to take the property when I can't pay." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "How much time did they give you?" 1 week. "Then we have 6 days to find enough of Stone's treasure to either pay them off or prove to the territorial authorities that you have legitimate claim to something valuable enough to warrant protection." The way she said "we" made Cole's chest tighten with something that might have been hope. "Rebecca, these are dangerous men. If they're willing to kill for this treasure, then it's even more important that it ends up in the right hands." Her jaw set with determination. "Jeremiah Stone died trying to keep his fortune away from murderers and thieves. I won't let his sacrifice be for nothing." They spent the rest of the morning planning their search strategy. According to Stone's journal, the main cache was hidden where the lightning struck pine guards the foundation stone. Cole's compass pointed consistently toward the old pine at the back of his property, but they would need to be careful about their digging. Too much obvious excavation would attract unwanted attention. As Rebecca prepared to leave, she turned back with one final piece of advice. "Be careful who you trust in this town, Cole. Garrett has eyes and ears everywhere, and not all of them wear obvious allegiances." After she left, Cole sat on his porch with Rusty beside him, watching the dust cloud from her wagon fade into the distance. For the first time in 3 years, he felt like he wasn't facing his problems alone. It was a dangerous feeling. Caring about someone meant having something to lose, and Cole had already lost more than he could bear. But as he opened Stone's journal again and began planning his next moves, Cole realized that maybe it was time to stop running from the possibility of loss and start fighting for the possibility of gain. The broken cowboy was starting to heal, one buried secret at a time. Cole found Stone's compass hidden in the most obvious place of all, inside the compass he already carried. It was Rebecca who made the connection. She had returned the next evening with more supplies and a determination to help solve the treasure mystery. As they sat studying Stone's journal by lamplight, she noticed how often the prospector mentioned "the compass points true" and "follow the needle's honest direction." "Cole," she said quietly, "may I see that compass again?" He handed over the brass instrument they'd found in Rusty's first excavation. Rebecca turned it carefully in her hands, examining every detail of its construction. "Look here," she said, pointing to what appeared to be decorative engraving around the base. These aren't just ornamental marks, they're tiny screws. Working. Together, they carefully removed the compass's base plate. Inside, nestled in a custom-fitted hollow, was a second, smaller compass. This one was different. Its needle was painted red instead of black, and instead of pointing north, it pointed steadily toward the lightning-struck pine at the back of Cole's property. Jeremiah Stone was even more clever than I thought, Rebecca whispered. He created a compass that would lead honest people to his treasure, but only if they were smart enough and careful enough to find the real navigation tool hidden inside the decoy. That night, under cover of darkness, they followed the red needle across Cole's property toward the ancient pine. The tree was massive, its trunk scarred by lightning but still standing strong. At its base, Cole's shovel struck something solid. After only 3 feet of digging, it wasn't the main treasure cache. That was too much to hope for so early in their search. Instead, they found another oiled leather bundle containing documents that made Cole's knees weak when he read them by lantern light. Territorial land grants, mining claims, water rights, all signed by official territorial agents and all bearing the name of Jeremiah Stone as the legal claimant. The documents were dated 1847, but they had been written with remarkable foresight. Stone had secured mineral and water rights to vast tracts of territory, including the land where Cedar Ridge now stood. "Cole," Rebecca said, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you understand what these are worth?" He did. In 1847, a smart man could secure territorial claims for pennies on the dollar, gambling that future development would make the land valuable. Stone had been very smart indeed. The mineral rights alone would be worth millions to the railroad companies and mining consortiums that were already eyeing this territory for expansion. But there was more. At the bottom of the document bundle was a letter addressed to whoever finds my legacy. If you are reading this, then you have proven yourself worthy of my trust through intelligence, patience, and courage. The documents you now hold represent my life's work, not just the gold I pulled from Devil's Canyon, but the legal foundation for an empire that could benefit honest people for generations. But beware. The Garrett gang knows about the gold, though. They do not know about these papers. They will kill for far less than what you now possess. Trust carefully. The law in this territory is often purchased rather than earned. The main cache lies beneath the foundation stone of whatever structure occupies the center of my property. I have buried it deep, protected by stone and sealed with lead. It will wait for you as it has waited for me. Use what you find wisely. Remember that wealth without honor is worse than poverty with dignity. J. Stone Cole carefully rewrapped the documents and handed them to Rebecca. I want you to keep these safe. Hide them where no one will think to look. Cole, these belong to you, your Stone's rightful heir through purchase of the property. And if something happens to me, they'll disappear forever. This way, if Garrett or his men come for me, the legal claims survive. He met her eyes in the lantern light. Besides, I trust you more than I trust anyone else in this town. It was a simple statement, but it carried the weight of everything Cole had learned about placing his faith in others. Rebecca understood. She tucked the documents inside her coat, close to her heart. The walk back to the trading post took them past the main building's foundation. Using Stone's compass and the measurements from his journal, they were able to identify what the prospector had called the foundation stone, a large flat rock that had been incorporated into the corner of the building when Ezra constructed his trading post. It's under there, Cole said, studying the stone that probably weighed close to a ton. The main treasure cache, $20 million in gold, according to Stone's notes. How are we going to move something that heavy without attracting attention? Cole was pondering that problem when Rusty's low growl alerted them to approaching danger. 3 riders were coming up the road at a walk, trying to approach silently. Even in the moonlight, Cole could make out the distinctive silhouette of Jake Garrett's black hat. "Get behind the building," Cole whispered to Rebecca, "and if shooting starts, run for town and don't look back." But Rebecca surprised him by pulling a small revolver from beneath her coat. "I told you I wanted to help. I meant it." They crouched in the shadows and watched as Garrett and two of his men dismounted near the trading post. The outlaws moved with the confidence of men who expected no resistance. They had clearly come to search the property, probably looking for signs that Cole had found anything valuable. Cole made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of hiding and hoping they would leave, he stood up and walked into the moonlight. "Evening." "Garrett," he called out calmly. "Kinda late for a social visit." The three men spun toward his voice, hands moving toward their weapons before they recognized him. "McBride." Garrett's tone was cold. "Just wanted to make sure you were taking our business arrangement seriously." "Oh, I'm taking it very seriously." Cole kept his hands visible but ready. "Been thinking about your offer all day, in fact." "Good. Glad to hear you're being reasonable." "Thing is," Cole continued, "I've been asking around town about you and Ezra's alleged debt. Funny thing, nobody else seems to remember him borrowing that kind of money from you." Garrett's false friendliness evaporated. "Careful, McBride. You're new here, don't know how things work yet." "I'm learning fast." Cole took a step closer and was gratified to see one of Garrett's men take a step back. "Here's what I've learned. So far, you've been pressuring people in this territory for years, claiming they owe you money they don't actually owe. Most of them pay up rather than face your guns. But Ezra didn't pay, did he? Ezra was a stubborn old fool. Ezra was an honest man who refused to be robbed by a pack of thieves." Cole's voice carried an edge of steel that hadn't been there 3 years ago. "And I'm cut from the same cloth." The tension stretched between them, like a wire about to snap. Cole could feel Garrett calculating, weighing the odds, trying to decide if it was worth starting a gunfight over. Finally, Garrett smiled, a cold expression that never touched his eyes. "You've got sand, McBride. I'll give you that. But sand won't stop bullets and it won't pay debts." "We'll see about that." After the three men rode away, Rebecca emerged from her hiding place with her revolver still in her hand. "That was either very brave or very stupid," she observed. "Probably both." Cole realized his hands were shaking slightly from the adrenaline. "But I'm tired of running from men like Garrett. Sometimes you have to make a stand, even when the odds are against you." Cole looked around at his property, the broken down trading post, the scattered junk, the holes that Rusty had dug in his patient search for buried treasure. Then he looked at Rebecca, whose presence had given him hope for the first time in 3 years. "Especially then," he said. They spent another hour planning their next moves before Rebecca departed for town. The main treasure cache was tantalizingly close, but accessing it would require careful excavation that couldn't be done in secret. They would need help, and they would need to move fast. Time was running out. In 4 more days, Garrett would return expecting payment of a debt that didn't exist, and Cole doubted the outlaw would be satisfied with explanations about legal technicalities. As he settled down for the night, with Rusty curled up beside his bedroll, Cole thought about how much his life had changed in just a few days. He had gone from a drifting cowboy with nothing to lose to a man with land, treasure, and people he cared about protecting. It was a dangerous transformation, but for the first time in years, Cole McBride felt like himself again, like the man he had been before loss, and grief had broken him down to nothing. The broken cowboy was healing, one buried secret at a time. But healing, he was beginning to understand, was often the most dangerous part of any journey. The official-looking documents arrived with the morning mail, delivered by a nervous postal clerk who seemed eager to be anywhere else. Cole opened the envelope to find papers bearing the seal of the Territorial Land Office, signed by someone calling himself Deputy Commissioner Victor Kane. The documents were a legal notice of eminent domain proceedings against Cole's property, claiming that the territorial government required his land for essential infrastructure development. According to the papers, Cole had 30 days to vacate, and would be compensated fair market value for the property, an amount listed as $50. $50 for 200 acres and water rights. It was highway robbery made legal with official stamps and fancy language. Cole was still staring at the papers when Rebecca arrived for their planned meeting. She took one look at his expression and immediately asked what was wrong. "Seems I've got more enemies than I knew about," he said, handing her the documents. Rebecca's face darkened as she read. "Victor Kane. I should have known he'd be involved in this." "You know him? He's not really a deputy commissioner. That's just a title he purchased from corrupt officials in the territorial capital. Caney owns most of the businesses in Cedar Ridge, plus several thousand acres of surrounding land. He's been buying up property throughout the territory, usually for far less than it's worth. Let me guess, people sell to him because the alternative is dealing with men like Jake Garrett." "Exactly. Caney provides the legal framework, Garrett provides the muscle. Together, they've been systematically taking over this entire region." Cole studied the documents again, looking for any legal avenue of resistance. "Can they actually do this? Force me off land I legally own?" "Under territorial law, yes. If they can prove the land is needed for legitimate government purposes." Rebecca's expression was grim. "But that's not what this is really about. Someone told Caney that your property might be valuable." The implications hit Cole like a physical blow. If Caney and Garrett were working together, then their threats were far more serious than simple extortion. They weren't just trying to steal. Whatever treasure might be buried on his land, they were planning to take the land itself, legally and permanently. "How long do you think we have before they make their move?" "Not long. The eminent domain notice gives you 30 days, but that's just for show. If they wanted to follow legal procedures, they wouldn't be using Jake Garrett as their enforcement arm." Cole made a decision that would have seemed impossible just a week ago. "Then we're going to have to move the foundation stone tonight." "Cole, that's insane. Even if we could lift something that heavy, the noise would wake half the territory. Not if we're smart about it." He had been thinking about this problem since they first identified the stone's location. "Rusty's been digging around the foundation for days. If we extend his excavations, we might be able to access the treasure cache from underneath, rather than trying to move the stone itself." It was dangerous work. Digging beneath a building's foundation risked bringing down the entire structure. But as Cole studied the trading post's construction, he realized that Ezra had built it with typical frontier practicality. The foundation stone was more ceremonial than structural. The building's real support came from wooden posts set deep in the ground. That evening they began their excavation. Working by moonlight and shielded lanterns, Cole and Rebecca took turns digging while Rusty served as lookout, his superior hearing alert for any approaching danger. The work was slow and exhausting, but gradually they created a tunnel that led beneath the foundation stone. What they found there changed everything. Jeremiah Stone had been thorough in his preparations. The treasure cache was protected by a stone-lined chamber sealed with lead sheets and covered with a massive iron plate. Carved into the plate was an inscription: "For those brave enough to seek justice, wise enough to use it well." Inside the chamber, carefully wrapped in oiled leather and stored in waterproof containers, was a fortune that exceeded even Stone's own estimates. Gold coins, silver ingots, precious gems, and bundles of currency from banks across the territory. But it was the additional documents that made Cole's hands shake as he held them up to the lantern light. Land grants, dozens of them covering thousands of acres throughout the region. Mining claims to some of the richest deposits in the territory, water rights to rivers and streams that would be essential for future development, and railroad contracts, agreements with Eastern Railroad companies that would make Stone's heirs fantastically wealthy when the transcontinental lines reached this territory. "My God," Rebecca whispered. Jeremiah Stone wasn't just a prospector. He was building an empire. Cole studied the railroad contracts more carefully. The agreements were conditional, on Stone's heirs, providing proof of legitimate ownership, but they guaranteed massive payments for right-of-way access across Stone's claimed territories. The contracts alone were worth more than $20 million. Now I understand why Caney is so interested in this property, Cole said. It's not just about what's buried here, it's about the legal claims that come with it. They worked through the night, carefully cataloging Stone's legacy and dividing it into portions that could be hidden in multiple locations. The gold and silver would stay buried. It was too heavy and too obvious to move safely, but the documents, the contracts, and the smaller valuables needed to be dispersed before Caney and Garrett realized what they were dealing with. As dawn approached, they sealed the main chamber and disguised their excavation site. To any casual observer, the area would look like nothing more than another of Rusty's random digging projects. "What now?" Rebecca asked as they cleaned the dirt from their hands and clothes. "Now we need help. Real help." Cole had been thinking about this all night. These documents prove I'm the legal heir to one of the largest fortunes in the territory. But paper claims won't mean much if Caney and Garrett kill me before I can file them with the proper authorities. The territorial marshal is 3 days' ride from here, and he's probably in Caney's pocket anyway. Then we need to find someone who isn't. Cole spent the morning studying Stone's documents, looking for any advantage they might provide. What he found was better than he'd hoped. Several of the land grants specifically mentioned mineral rights that extended beneath the town of Cedar Ridge itself. If the documents were properly filed and recognized, Cole would own not just his inherited property, but significant portions of the town where Caney conducted his business. More importantly, the water rights claims would give Cole control over the creek that supplied Cedar Ridge with its fresh water. Without access to that water, Caney's various enterprises would be worthless. "This changes everything," Rebecca said when Cole explained what he discovered. "If these claims are legitimate, you're not just wealthy. You have power over everyone who's been trying to take your property. If they're legitimate, that's the key phrase." Cole carefully folded the most important documents and placed them in his saddlebags. "I need to ride to the territorial capital and file these claims properly. Once they're on official record, Caney and Garrett can't just make me disappear without facing serious legal consequences. That's a 5-day ride through dangerous territory, and you can't leave the property unprotected. They'll tear it apart looking for whatever you found." Cole had already considered that problem. "You're right, which is why I'm not going alone. And I'm not leaving the treasure unguarded." That afternoon, Cole made an unexpected visit to Martha Hendricks, the woman who owned Cedar Ridge's largest saloon. Martha was a practical woman in her 50s who had built her business by understanding people and their motivations. More importantly, she had no love for Victor Kane or his business practices. "Caney's been trying to buy me out for 2 years. Martha told Cole over coffee in her private office behind the saloon. "Keeps raising his offers, but I know what that really means. Soon as I sell, he'll jack up the prices and drive out half my customers." Cole showed her selected portions of Stone's documents, enough to prove he had legitimate claims, not enough to reveal the full scope of the treasure. "These land grants include the mineral rights beneath your saloon," he explained. "If they're properly filed, you'd be dealing with me instead of Caney for any future business arrangements." Martha studied the documents with the sharp eye of someone who had learned not to trust easily. "Assuming these papers are legitimate, what are you proposing?" "I need allies, people I can trust to help protect what Jeremiah Stone left behind, and to stand up to Caney and Garrett when they make their move. In exchange for what? Fair dealing, reasonable prices, and a share of the profits when the railroad comes through." Cole met her steady gaze. "I'm not looking to become the new Victor Caney. I'm looking to build something honest that benefits everyone." Martha was quiet for a long moment, considering. Finally, she extended her hand. "You've got yourself a partner, Cole McBride. What do you need me to do?" Over the next 2 days, Cole quietly approached other business owners and longtime residents who had reasons to oppose Caney's growing control over the territory. What he found was a simmering resentment that had been waiting for someone brave enough to organize it into resistance. The blacksmith, Tom Crawford, had seen his business decline as Caney forced customers to use his preferred suppliers. The general, store owner Sarah Mitchell, had been pressured to sell her building to Caney at below-market prices. Even some of the smaller ranchers in the area had been losing water rights to Kane's legal maneuvering. None of them had the resources to fight. Caney alone, together, with Cole's legal claims as leverage, they might have a chance. On the third evening after finding the treasure cache, Cole called a meeting at Martha's saloon. A dozen people attended, business owners, ranchers, and longtime residents, who had grown tired of watching their community be carved up by outsiders. Cole spread Stone's land grants across Martha's largest table and explained what they meant. According to these documents, Jeremiah Stone secured legal claims to water rights, mineral rights, and land grants that cover most of this territory. As his legal successor through purchase of his property, those claims transfer to me. If the documents are legitimate, Tom Crawford said carefully. They are, but they need to be filed with the territorial government before Caney realizes what we're dealing with. Sarah Mitchell studied one of the water rights documents. This shows you control the creek that supplies the town's fresh water. That's right, which means I have leverage against anyone who tries to force me off my property. The group spent 2 hours discussing strategy. The plan they developed was ambitious but potentially effective. Cole would ride to the territorial capital with a small group of witnesses to file the land claims officially. Meanwhile, the remaining allies would prepare for Caney and Garrett's inevitable response. But as the meeting was breaking up, Martha pulled Cole aside with troubling news. Jake Garrett was in here earlier today, asking questions about you. He knows you've been meeting with people, and he's getting nervous. What kind of questions? Wanted to know if you'd shown anyone anything valuable, seemed particularly interested in whether you'd found any old papers or documents. Cole felt his blood chill. If Garrett suspected the existence of Stone's legal documents, the timeline for everything had just accelerated dramatically. How much time do you think we have? Martha's expression was grim. Maybe a day, 2 at most. Garrett's not the patient type, and neither is Caney. Cole made a decision that would determine the fate of everyone involved. Then we leave tonight. No more waiting, no more preparation. We file these claims now, before they can stop us. As he prepared for the dangerous journey to the territorial capital, Cole reflected on how much his life had changed since inheriting what he thought was worthless property. A week ago, he had been a broken man with nothing to lose. Now he was responsible for a fortune that could change the lives of everyone in Cedar Ridge, and he had people depending on him to protect it. The broken cowboy was no longer broken. But the most dangerous part of his transformation was still ahead. They never made it out of Cedar Ridge. Cole was saddling Belle in the pre-dawn darkness when Rusty's urgent barking shattered the silence. Through the morning mist, Cole could see riders approaching, not just Garrett and his usual men, but a larger group that included several he didn't recognize. "Rebecca," he called softly, to where she waited with the horses Tom Crawford had provided for their journey. "We've got company." But Rebecca was already moving, her rifle in her hands and her face set with grim determination. "There's too many of them, Cole. We'll have to make our stand here." Cole counted at least 8 riders, all armed and spread out in a tactical formation that spoke of military experience. These weren't just common outlaws. They were professionals, and they had come prepared for a fight. Jake Garrett rode in the center of the group, his pale eyes fixed on Cole with predatory satisfaction. Beside him rode a man Cole had never seen before, well-dressed with the soft look of someone who preferred to let others do his killing, but with eyes that held their own kind of danger. Victor Kane. It had to be. "Morning, McBride." Garrett called out when the group was still 50 yards away. "Hope you're ready to settle our business arrangement." "Depends on what kind of business you think we have," Cole replied, his hand resting on his Colt's grip. The well-dressed man urged his horse forward slightly. "Mr. McBride, I'm Victor Kane. I believe you received my legal documents regarding your property." "I received your robbery attempt disguised as legal papers, if that's what you mean." Kaney's smile was cold and calculating. "I'm afraid you misunderstand the situation. This property has been condemned under territorial eminent domain law. You're now trespassing on government land." "Funny thing about that," Cole said, patting his saddlebags where Stone's documents rested. "I've got some legal papers of my own that say different." He saw Caney and Garrett exchange a quick look and knew his suspicions were correct. They weren't just trying to steal his property. They knew about Jeremiah Stone's legacy and were determined to claim it for themselves. "Whatever papers you think you found," Caney said carefully, "I assure you they have no legal standing. Jeremiah Stone died over 30 years ago. Any claims he might have filed have long since expired. We'll let the territorial courts decide." I'm afraid that won't be possible." Caney's facade of civility dropped away entirely. "You see, Mr. McBride, you're not going to live long enough to file any legal claims." It was the signal Garrett had been waiting for. His hand moved toward his gun with practiced speed, but Cole had been expecting the move. His own Colt cleared. Leather first, the heavy revolver bucking in his hand as he put a bullet through Garrett's shoulder. The outlaw spun in his saddle, cursing and clutching his wounded arm. But he didn't go down. Around him, his men were drawing their own weapons, and Cole realized with sick certainty that he and Rebecca were outnumbered 4-1. Then the morning exploded with gunfire from unexpected directions. Martha Hendricks rose from behind the cover of an overturned wagon, her shotgun booming as she sent buckshot into the group of riders. Tom Crawford appeared at the corner of the trading post, his rifle cracking steadily as he picked his targets with the precision of an old soldier. Sarah Mitchell and 3 other townspeople emerged from positions they had taken during the night, their weapons adding to the sudden storm of lead that sent Caney's hired guns scrambling for cover. Cole's allies had not abandoned him. When word spread that Caney and Garrett were moving against him, the people of Cedar Ridge had made their choice. The battle was brief but fierce. Caught in a crossfire they hadn't expected, several of Kane's men went down in the first volley. The others quickly discovered that fighting angry townspeople defending their community was very different from intimidating isolated ranchers. When the shooting stopped, 3 of Caney's hired guns were dead, and 2 more were wounded badly enough to be out of the fight. Garrett himself had taken a second bullet, this one through his leg, and was bleeding heavily as he tried to control his panicked horse. Victor Kane sat his mount in the middle of the chaos, his face pale with shock and rage. "This isn't over. McBride," he said through gritted teeth, "you have no idea what you're dealing with." "Neither do you," Cole replied. He reached into his saddlebags and pulled out one of Stone's land grants, not the most valuable document, but impressive enough for his purposes. "This is an original territorial land grant signed by the government, agent in 1847. It gives me legal ownership of the mineral rights beneath half of Cedar Ridge, including the land your businesses sit on." Caney's eyes widened as he recognized the official seals and signatures on the document. "That's impossible. Those claims would have been filed decades ago." Jeremiah Stone was a careful man. He buried his legal documents along with his gold, waiting for someone honest enough to file them properly. Cole folded the document and tucked it back into his saddlebags. "I'm riding to the territorial capital today to make these claims official. When I get back, we're going to renegotiate every business arrangement you forced on this community." "You think one document will change anything?" Caney's voice was full of fury and desperation. "I have connections throughout the territorial government. I can have you declared an outlaw, a claim jumper. With what evidence?" Rebecca stepped forward, her rifle still trained on the group of riders. Everyone in this town will testify that you just attempted to murder a legitimate property owner in order to steal his legally inherited land. Cole could see Caney calculating, trying to find some angle that would salvage his position. What he saw in the man's eyes was the realization that everything he had built through intimidation and corruption was suddenly at risk. "This isn't over," Caney repeated, but his voice lacked the conviction it had held moments before. "You're right," Cole agreed. "It's not over, but it's changed. From now on, this community protects its own." After Caney and his remaining men limped away, Cole gathered with his allies to assess their situation. They had won the immediate battle, but the war was far from over. "Caney will be back," Martha said practically, "and next time he'll bring more men and better planning. Which is why we need to move fast," Cole replied. "Those legal documents need to be filed before he can find a way to stop us." Tom Crawford wiped blood from a graze on his cheek. "What about the wounded and the dead ones?" "Self-defense," Rebecca said firmly. "They came onto private property with the intent to commit murder. Everyone here will testify to that." Cole looked around at the people who had risked their lives to help him defend Stone's legacy. A week ago, he had been a stranger to these people. Now they were willing to stand against the most powerful man in the territory because they believed in the cause he represented. "I need to ask something difficult of all of you," he said. "The journey to the territorial capital will be dangerous, and staying here won't be much safer. Caney will try to strike back, probably sooner rather than later." "What are you asking?" Sarah Mitchell inquired. "I'm asking if you trust me enough to see this through to the end, because once we file these claims, there's no going back. We'll be committed to seeing justice done, no matter the cost." The response was unanimous. Every person present pledged to continue the fight. That afternoon, Cole made a discovery that changed their entire strategy. While searching through the rest of Stone's documents, he found something that made his hands tremble as he read it. Sealed letter addressed to be opened only in case of mortal danger. Inside was information that revealed the true scope of the conspiracy they were facing, and the identity of the one person in Cedar Ridge who had been feeding information to their enemies all along. The broken cowboy was about to learn that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is the one you trust the most. The tarnished sheriff's badge fell from Cole's trembling fingers onto the table, its metal surface catching the lamplight like an accusation. He read Stone's final letter again, hoping he had misunderstood, but the words remained unchanged in their terrible clarity. "Tom Hawkins was my partner in 1847. We found the mother lode together, worked the claim together, planned our futures together. But when the Garrett gang started closing in, Tom got scared. He made a deal with them, my life and the location of the treasure, in exchange for his own safety and a share of the gold. I escaped the trap he set, but barely. Had to abandon everything and run for my life. Tom thought he was clever, thought he could claim the treasure for himself once I was dead. But I had already moved it, hidden it where even my former partner would never think to look. If you are reading this, then Tom Hawkins is likely still alive, still wearing his badge, still pretending to be an honest lawman. Trust him at your peril. The wolf in sheep's clothing is always the most dangerous predator. J. Stone Sheriff Tom Hawkins. The friendly lawman who had welcomed Cole to Cedar Ridge, who had warned him about the dangers of the territory, who had seemed genuinely concerned for his safety. The same man who had known exactly where to find Cole's property, who had asked pointed questions about what he might have found there, who had somehow always appeared at convenient moments during his conflicts with Garrett and Caney. Rebecca, who had been reading over his shoulder, sank into a chair beside him. "Tom Hawkins, I can't believe it. He's been the sheriff here for over 20 years. Everyone trusts him, which makes him the perfect spy for Caney and Garrett." Cole's mind was racing, putting together pieces that should have been obvious. He's been feeding them information about everything we've done, Our meetings, our plans, our discoveries, no wonder they always seemed to be one step ahead. The implications were staggering. Hawkins had been present when Cole first arrived in town, had questioned him about his inheritance, had been there during the confrontation with Garrett's men. Every conversation, every plan, every secret, all of it, had been reported back to their enemies. Cole. Rebecca's voice was barely a whisper. If Hawkins has been working with them all along, then he knows about the treasure. He knows about the legal documents. He knows everything. Worse than that, Cole realized with growing horror. He knows we're planning to ride to the territorial capital. He knows we have evidence that could destroy Caney's empire. As if summoned by their conversation, the sound of approaching horses reached their ears. Cole quickly folded Stone's letter and slipped it into his pocket alongside the incriminating badge. Through the window, he could see a familiar figure, riding toward the trading post, Sheriff Tom Hawkins, arriving for what he probably thought would be a routine information-gathering visit. Act natural, Cole whispered to Rebecca. Don't let him know we've discovered his secret. Hawkins dismounted with his usual unhurried manner, tipping his hat politely as he approached the porch. To anyone watching, he looked like exactly what he appeared to be, a conscientious lawman checking on a new resident who had recently been involved in violence. Afternoon, Cole, Miss Hayes. His smile seemed genuine, his manner relaxed and friendly. Heard there was some trouble this morning. Wanted to make sure everyone was all right. We're fine, Sheriff, Cole replied carefully. Thanks for your concern. Mind if I come in? Like to get your account of what happened with Kane's men? Cole gestured for him to enter, his mind working furiously to figure out how to handle the situation. Hawkins was armed, experienced, and surrounded by people who trusted him completely. If Cole accused him directly without proof, it would be his word against that of a respected 20-year lawman. But if he said nothing, Hawkins would continue feeding information to their enemies until Caney found a way to destroy them all. So, Hawkins said, settling into a chair and pulling out a small notebook, tell me exactly what happened this morning. Cole provided a carefully edited version of events, watching Hawkins's face for any sign that the sheriff already knew more than he was letting on. What he saw was professional interest and what appeared to be genuine concern. But now that he knew the truth, Cole could also see the calculation behind the man's eyes. Sounds like you handled yourselves well, Hawkins said when Cole finished his account. But I'm concerned about what comes next. Caney's not the type to let something like this go. What do you suggest we do? Well, if you really have legal documents that support your claims to this property, the smart thing would be to get them filed with the territorial authorities as soon as possible. Cole felt his blood chill. Hawkins was probing for information about the very documents that could destroy Caney's empire, and he was doing it with the skill of someone who had been gathering intelligence for decades. That's good advice, Cole replied neutrally. Course the territorial capital is a dangerous ride from here. Lot of places where a man could run into trouble, especially if certain people knew he was carrying valuable papers. The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Hawkins was letting Cole know that any attempt to file Stone's claims would result in an ambush along the trail. I appreciate the warning, Sheriff. Hawkins stood to leave, but paused at the door. Cole, I've been thinking about your situation. Man in your position, with enemies like Caney and Garrett, might want to consider accepting their offers and moving. Nay, sometimes discretion is the better part of valor. I'll keep that in mind. After Hawkins rode away, Cole and Rebecca sat in stunned silence. The full scope of their problem was now clear. They were surrounded by enemies, including one who wore a badge and commanded the respect of the entire community. What do we do now? Rebecca asked. Cole pulled out Stone's letter and read it one more time, looking for any clue about how to handle the situation. What he found was a postscript he had missed in his initial shock at the revelation. Tom kept one thing from our partnership, a compass I gave him as a token of our friendship. It bears an inscription, to TH, True North leads to justice. JS, If he still carries it, it will prove his connection to the treasure and his betrayal of our partnership. Cole's heart began to beat faster. If Hawkins still carried Stone's compass, it would be physical evidence of his connection to the treasure and his betrayal of his former partner. It wouldn't be enough to convict him in a court of law, but it would be enough to prove to the townspeople that their trusted sheriff was working with their enemies. "Rebecca, I need you to do something dangerous." "What?" "I need you to get close enough to Sheriff Hawkins to see if he carries an old compass. Stone said it would have an inscription linking it to the original treasure. How am I supposed to do that?" Cole was already formulating a plan. Risky, but potentially effective. You're going to ask him for help with a problem only the sheriff can solve. And while you're talking to him, you're going to find out what he carries in his pockets. That evening, Rebecca visited Hawkins at his office, claiming to be concerned about suspicious men she had seen near the schoolhouse. While she talked, she carefully observed the contents of his desk and the personal items he carried. What she discovered confirmed their worst fears. Hawkins did indeed carry an old compass, one that he handled with the familiarity of long possession. When he briefly set it aside to consult a map, Rebecca was able to read the inscription on its case. 2TH. True north leads to justice. JS. The evidence was undeniable. Sheriff Tom Hawkins was the traitor who had betrayed Jeremiah Stone 30 years ago, and who was now working with Victor Caney and Jake Garrett to steal the treasure that should have been Stone's legacy. But confronting a corrupt sheriff was far more dangerous than facing ordinary outlaws. Hawkins had the law on his side, the trust of the community, and decades of experience in making his enemies disappear without leaving evidence behind. Cole spent a sleepless night planning their next move. By morning, he had decided on a course of action that would either expose Hawkins and destroy Caney's conspiracy, or get them all killed in the attempt. The broken cowboy was about to discover that sometimes the most dangerous battles are fought not against obvious enemies, but against the people everyone else believes are heroes. Cole found Jeremiah Stone's final gift in the most dangerous place imaginable, hidden inside the town jail. The discovery happened by accident. While searching through Stone's remaining papers for any additional evidence against Hawkins, Cole found a hand-drawn map of Cedar Ridge as it had existed in 1847. According to the map, Stone had cached emergency supplies in what was then an abandoned root cellar. The location matched exactly with the current site of the sheriff's office and jail. The implications were staggering. Stone had hidden weapons, explosives, and mining equipment directly beneath the building where his former partner now worked. As sheriff, the cache had been waiting 30 years for someone brave enough to claim it. "This is insane," Rebecca whispered as Cole explained his plan. "You want to break into the jail to recover buried explosives so you can fight the sheriff who runs the jail." Stone knew what he was doing when he chose that location. Hawkins would never think to look for treasure directly under his own feet. Cole studied the cache map more carefully, and according to this, the entrance is through an old tunnel that connects to the trading post's cellar. It took them 2 hours of careful excavation to find the tunnel entrance. Hidden beneath a false floor in Ezra's cellar was a narrow passage that had been expertly concealed for decades. The tunnel was just wide enough for a man to crawl through, its walls lined with stone to prevent collapse. Cole made the journey alone, leaving Rebecca to stand watch. The tunnel led directly beneath the jail's foundation to a chamber that Jeremiah Stone had carved from solid rock. Inside, preserved by the dry desert air, was everything a man might need to wage war against superior numbers. Dynamite, enough to bring down half the town if used carelessly, but perfect for creating defensive positions or eliminating strategic targets. Mining tools that could be used to create fortifications, and weapons, rifles, pistols, and ammunition that Stone had cached against the day when his enemies might finally corner him. But it was Stone's final letter, sealed and waiting in the center of the chamber, that provided the key to defeating Hawkins and his allies. If you have found this place, then my former partner has forced you to desperate measures. Tom Hawkins knows about most of my caches, but he never knew about this one. He thinks he's clever, thinks he can steal what I spent my life accumulating. He's wrong. The compass he carries contains more than just an inscription. Hidden in its base is a key to a safety deposit box in the Territorial Bank. Inside that box are documents that prove his involvement in my attempted murder and his ongoing conspiracy with the Garrett gang. Use them wisely. Also in this chamber you will find my personal rifle, a custom Winchester that shoots true at distances other weapons cannot match. If you must fight Tom Hawkins, fight him at long range. He's fast with a pistol, but he never learned to handle a rifle properly. Remember, justice delayed is not justice denied. Sometimes the guilty must wait years for their crimes to catch up. With them, today is Tom Hawkins's day of reckoning. Cole carefully examined Stone's rifle. It was a beautiful weapon, clearly crafted by a master gunsmith. The barrel was longer than standard, the sights were precision-made, and the action was as smooth as silk despite 30 years of storage. This was the weapon of a man who had learned to kill at distance in order to survive. Loading his arms with Stone's cash, Cole made several trips through the tunnel. By dawn, he had established a supply depot in the trading post that would allow him and his allies to withstand a siege or mount an offensive against superior numbers. But first, he needed to deal with Sheriff Hawkins. Cole's plan was elegant in its simplicity. Using information from Stone's letter, he would confront Hawkins publicly, in front of witnesses, and force the corrupt sheriff to reveal his true loyalties. The compass Stone had mentioned would provide physical evidence of Hawkins' connection to the treasure, and if violence became necessary, Cole would be ready with weapons and explosives that his enemies didn't know existed. The confrontation was set for noon in front of Martha's saloon, where the entire town could witness it. Cole spent the morning preparing for what might be his final day alive. He wrote letters to be sent to territorial authorities in case he didn't survive, detailing everything he had learned about the conspiracy between Hawkins, Caney, and Garrett. He distributed weapons and ammunition to his allies, teaching them how to use Stone's explosives if the situation required it. Most importantly, he spent time with Rebecca, knowing that their growing feelings for each other might not survive the day. "Promise me something," she said, as they stood together on the trading post's porch, watching the sun climb toward its zenith. "Anything. Promise me you won't try to be a hero. Promise me you'll do whatever it takes to survive this, even if it means running away." Cole took her hands in his, feeling their strength and warmth. "I can't promise that. Too many people are depending on me to see this through. I'm depending on you too, not to be a hero, but to be alive when this is over." At 11:30, Cole strapped on Stone's rifle and walked toward the center of town. Word of the confrontation had spread quickly, and by the time he reached Martha's saloon, half the population of Cedar Ridge had gathered to watch. Sheriff Tom Hawkins stood waiting in the dusty street, his badge gleaming in the sunlight and his hand resting casually near his gun. He looked like exactly what he appeared to be, a confident lawman about to deal with a troublemaker. "Cole McBride," Hawkins called out when he was still 20 yards away. "I hear you've been making some serious accusations against me." "That's right, Tom. Or should I call you by your real name? Traitor, murderer, and thief." A murmur ran through the crowd. These people had trusted Hawkins for 20 years. They weren't ready to believe their sheriff was a criminal without compelling evidence. "Those are serious charges," Hawkins replied, his voice carrying just the right note of wounded dignity. "I hope you can prove them." Cole reached into his pocket and pulled out the tarnished badge he had found in Stone's cache. He held it up where everyone could see it. "This belonged to you in 1847, when you were Jeremiah Stone's partner and the deputy sheriff of this territory." Hawkins' expression didn't change, but Cole saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear, perhaps, or calculation. "I've never seen that badge before in my life." Then you won't mind showing everyone the compass you carry, the one inscribed to TH, true north leads to justice. JS. Now, Hawkins' composure cracked slightly. His hand moved instinctively toward his pocket, then stopped as he realized what he was revealing. Show them the compass, Tom, Cole continued, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. Show them the gift Jeremiah Stone gave you before you betrayed him to the Garrett gang. The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Cole could see Hawkins calculating his options, trying to find some way to salvage his position. Finally, Hawkins smiled, a cold expression that was nothing like the friendly demeanor he had always shown the townspeople. You know what, McBride? You're right, I do have Stone's compass, and I'm proud of it. He pulled out the brass instrument and held it up for all to see. Jeremiah Stone was a fool who thought he could keep a fortune to himself. He got what he deserved, and I got what I earned through 30 years of patient work. The crowd gasped as Hawkins finally revealed his true nature. But he wasn't finished. And you know what else? Every one of you has been living under my protection all these years, and you never even knew it. I've kept the peace in this town, kept the worst elements at bay, and made sure businesses could operate without interference. By working with Victor Caney and Jake Garrett, Cole said. By being practical. By understanding that sometimes you have to make deals with dangerous men to protect decent people. Martha Hendricks stepped forward from the crowd, her face flushed with anger. You've been helping them steal from us for years. I've been managing a delicate situation, and I would have continued managing it if this fool hadn't stumbled onto something he was too stupid to leave alone. Hawkins' mask had fallen away completely. Now, the friendly sheriff was gone, replaced by a hard, bitter man who had spent decades justifying his crimes to himself. Here's what's going to happen, Hawkins continued. McBride is going to turn over all of Stone's documents and treasure to me, and then he's going to leave this territory. Anyone who tries to help him is going to find themselves facing serious legal consequences. What if we refuse? Tom Crawford called out from the crowd. Hawkins' smile turned predatory. Then you'll discover that accidents happen to people who oppose the law in this territory. It was the moment Cole had been waiting for. Hawkins had revealed himself as the corrupt official he truly was, in front of witnesses who could testify to his confession. But Cole had underestimated his opponent's desperation. Without warning, Hawkins drew his gun with the speed of a man who had survived 30 years of frontier justice. His Colt cleared leather in a blur of motion, the barrel swinging toward Cole with deadly precision. The broken cowboy had less than a second to prove that Jeremiah Stone's training and weapons could overcome 3 decades of practice and treachery. The brass-bound treasure chest emerged from its 30-year hiding place like something from a dream, its ornate surface gleaming despite decades buried beneath Cedar Ridge's foundation stone. Cole's hands trembled as he brushed away the last of the earth that had concealed Jeremiah Stone's greatest secret. Inside, wrapped in oiled leather and sealed against time and weather, was a fortune that exceeded even Stone's own estimates. Gold. Coins from a dozen different mints, silver ingots stamped with territorial marks, precious gems that caught the lamplight like captured stars. But it was the documents that made Cole's breath catch in his throat. Land deeds, railroad contracts, and mining claims that would make their holder one of the wealthiest individuals in the entire territory. "My God," Rebecca whispered, kneeling beside him in the excavated chamber. "It's real. It's all real." But their moment of triumph was shattered by the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. Through the morning air came the sound of many riders moving, fast, and Cole knew with sickening certainty that their enemies had found them. Jake Garrett's voice carried across the property like a death sentence. "We know you're in there, McBride. Come out now, and maybe we'll make this quick." Cole grabbed Stone's rifle and moved to the window. What he saw made his blood run cold. At least 20 riders surrounded his property, not just Garrett's usual gang, but professional gunmen hired. By Victor Kane. They had come prepared for war. How did they know? Rebecca asked, checking her own weapon. Cole's mind raced through the possibilities, then settled on the obvious answer. Hawkins. He must have told them we found the main cache. Outside, Garrett's men were spreading out in a tactical formation, taking cover behind whatever shelter they could find. These weren't desperate outlaws making a hasty grab for easy money. They were professionals executing a carefully planned assault. "You've got 1 minute, McBride," Garrett shouted. "Then we come in shooting." Cole made a quick decision. He grabbed several sticks of Stone's dynamite and handed half to Rebecca. "Can you get to the back window without being seen?" "What are you planning?" "Stone didn't just leave us treasure. He left us the tools to defend it." Cole positioned himself at the front window, Stone's rifle ready. Through the dusty glass, he could see Victor Kane sitting his horse well back. From the main action, directing his hired guns like pieces on a chessboard. The land baron had finally decided to claim Stone's fortune personally. The first shot came from Garrett's position near the old water trough. The bullet splintered the window frame inches from Cole's head, sending glass fragments across the floor. Cole returned fire with Stone's precision rifle, the heavy slug punching through the trough's wooden side and drawing a yelp of pain from whoever was hiding behind it. Then the real battle began. Gunfire erupted from a dozen positions as Kane's men opened up on the trading post. Bullets smashed through windows, splintered wooden walls, and filled the air with deadly lead. Cole kept low, using the solid construction of the building for protection while picking his shots carefully. Stone's rifle was everything the prospector had promised. At distances where ordinary weapons became inaccurate, the custom Winchester shot true. Cole put down 2 of Kane's men with carefully aimed shots, forcing the others to find better cover. But they were still outnumbered 10-1, and ammunition wouldn't last forever. "Rebecca!" Cole called over the thunder of gunfire. "Now would be good." From the back of the building came the distinctive whistle of a thrown stick of dynamite arcing through the air. The explosion sent 3 men scrambling from their positions behind a collapsed shed, and Rebecca's rifle cracked twice, ending their retreat permanently. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Cole moved from window to window, using Stone's rifle to keep the attackers at distance, while Rebecca guarded their flanks with her own weapon and carefully placed explosives. But gradually, inevitably, their enemies began to close in. Kane had brought too many men, and professional gunfighters weren't easily discouraged by a few casualties. Cole was reloading when he heard Rusty's warning bark from outside. The old dog had positioned himself where he could watch for flanking movements, and his urgent alarm meant someone was trying to approach the building from an unexpected angle. Through a crack in the wall, Cole saw Sheriff Tom Hawkins creeping towards the trading post's side entrance, his badge glinting in the morning sun and his gun in his hand. The corrupt lawman had finally decided to join the battle personally. "He's coming for the treasure," Cole realized. While his hired guns kept Cole and Rebecca pinned down, Hawkins planned to slip inside and claim Stone's fortune for himself. Cole made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life, however long that might be. He grabbed the largest stick of dynamite from Stone's cache, lit the fuse, and threw it not at Hawkins, but at the treasure chest itself. "What are you doing?" Rebecca screamed. "If we can't have it, nobody can." The explosion destroyed everything, the gold, the silver, the precious documents that would have made them millionaires. Cole watched 30 years of Jeremiah Stone's careful planning disappear in smoke and flame, taking with it any chance of the peaceful, prosperous future he and Rebecca might have shared. But the destruction also brought the battle to an abrupt halt. Victor Kane's voice cut through the sudden silence. Cease fire, you idiots. He's destroying the treasure." In that moment of confusion, Cole heard something that changed everything. The sound of many horses approaching fast from the direction of town. But these weren't more of Kane's men. These were the allies he had been counting on. Martha Hendricks led the charge, a shotgun in her hands and fury in her eyes. Behind her rode Tom Crawford, Sarah Mitchell, and a dozen other townspeople who had finally decided to take their community back from the corruption that had plagued it for years. The tide of battle turned in an instant. Caught between Cole's defensive position and the attacking townspeople, Caney's hired guns found themselves trapped in a deadly crossfire. Several threw down their weapons immediately, while others tried to fight their way out of the encirclement. Garrett, wounded but still dangerous, made one last desperate attempt to claim the treasure. Ignoring the burning remains of the chest, he charged toward the trading post with his gun blazing, determined to kill Cole McBride even if it cost him his own life. Cole met him at the doorway. Stone's rifle against Garrett's pistol. 30 years of hatred and greed finally coming to its inevitable conclusion. The broken cowboy was no longer broken. But the most dangerous moment of his transformation was yet to come. Jeremiah Stone's rifle spoke with the authority of justice 30 years delayed. Cole's shot took Jake Garrett's center mass, the heavy slug spinning the outlaw around and dropping him into the dust where he belonged. But even as Garrett fell, his dying hand squeezed off one last shot that sent lead whistling past Cole's ear, close enough to draw blood. The battle for Cedar Ridge was ending, but not quietly. Sheriff Tom Hawkins emerged from the smoke of the destroyed treasure chamber like a specter of guilt and greed. His face was blackened by the explosion, his uniform torn and singed, but his gun was steady in his hand as he advanced on Cole's position. 30 years, Hawkins said, his voice hoarse with smoke and rage. 30 years I've been waiting to finish what I started with Stone. You think you can waltz into my territory and destroy everything I've built? Cole worked the rifle's action, chambering a fresh round. Your territory? These are decent people. You've been bleeding dry for decades. These people needed protection from men like Garrett and Caney. I provided it. By working with them, by helping them steal from the very people you swore to protect. Hawkins laughed, a bitter sound that held no humor. You still don't understand, do you, boy? There are wolves and there are sheep in this world. I kept the wolves fed just enough to keep them from slaughtering the whole flock. Cole could see movement in his peripheral vision. Rebecca positioning herself for a flanking shot, Martha Hendricks and her allies closing in from multiple directions. But Hawkins seemed oblivious to everything except his confrontation with the man who had destroyed his carefully constructed web of corruption. Stone never understood that either. Hawkins continued, thought he could change the world with his fortune, make everything fair and just. All he really did was paint a target on his back, and you helped the Garrett gang put bullets in that target. I survived. Stone didn't. That's the only law that matters on the frontier. Cole raised Stone's rifle to his shoulder, the weapon feeling as natural in his hands as if he'd carried it all his life. Maybe it's time for a new kind of law. The shot that ended Tom Hawkins' 30-year reign of corruption came not from Cole's rifle, but from an unexpected direction entirely. Rusty, the old dog, who had started everything by digging in the right place at the right time, launched himself at the corrupt sheriff just as Hawkins squeezed his trigger. The dog's weight threw off Hawkins' aim, sending his bullet harmlessly into the air, while Cole's own shot took the sheriff through the chest. Hawkins staggered backwards, his badge catching the sunlight one last time before he fell beside the smoldering remains of the treasure he had spent his life trying to steal. Good boy, Rusty, Cole said softly, kneeling to check on the dog who had proven once again that loyalty was worth more than gold. The aftermath of the battle was swift and decisive. Victor Caney, seeing his hired guns defeated and his key ally dead, tried to rally his remaining men for one final assault. But the townspeople of Cedar Ridge had found their courage, and they were no longer willing to be intimidated by threats and violence. Caney's last stand was brief and pathetic. Cornered behind an overturned wagon, with only 2 men left alive to support him, he tried to negotiate a surrender that would let him escape with his life and freedom. I'm a legitimate businessman, he called out desperately. I have legal documents, territorial appointments, connections throughout the government. You had those things, Martha Hendricks replied, her shotgun trained on his position. "But dead men don't own property, and criminals don't get to keep what they've stolen." The final shots of the battle were fired not in anger, but in justice. Caney's remaining supporters threw down their weapons and begged for mercy. Caney himself tried to run for his horse and freedom, but Tom Crawford's rifle ended his flight permanently. When the smoke cleared and the gunfire stopped, Cole found himself standing in the ruins of what had been his inherited property, surrounded by people who had risked everything to help him defend Jeremiah Stone's legacy. The treasure was gone, destroyed by Cole's own desperate gambit. The trading post was riddled with bullet holes and partially collapsed from the explosions. The carefully hidden caches that Stone had spent years accumulating were scattered or ruined. But something more valuable had been saved. "It's over," Rebecca said, moving to Cole's side and taking his hand. "Caney's dead, Hawkins is dead, Garrett's gang is finished. The territory is free." Cole looked around at the faces of his allies, Martha, Tom, Sarah, and the others who had chosen to stand with him against corruption and greed. These people had found the courage to fight for their community, and in doing so, they had discovered something worth more than any buried treasure. "The gold is gone," Cole said quietly. "Stone's documents are destroyed. There's nothing left of his fortune." "Except this," Rebecca replied, gesturing toward the people gathered around them. "Except the freedom to build something honest without fear of men like Caney and Hawkins." Martha stepped forward, a practical expression on her weathered face. "Cole, I know you're thinking you failed, that all this fighting was for nothing, but you're wrong. How do you figure? Because you gave us something more valuable than gold. You gave us the chance to be proud of our community again." Tom Crawford nodded agreement. "Besides, who says the treasure is completely gone?" Cole frowned. "I saw it explode. Stone's fortune is scattered to the wind. Stone's buried treasure, maybe. But what about his legal claims, his water rights and mineral rights? Those weren't stored in any chest. They were filed with territorial authorities decades ago." Cole felt his heart skip a beat. "What are you saying?" Sarah Mitchell smiled. "We're saying that as the legal owner of Stone's original property, you might still have claim to a fortune, just not the kind that comes in a treasure chest." Rebecca squeezed his hand. "Tom's right. Stone's real legacy wasn't gold and silver. It was the legal framework he created for honest development of this territory." Cole looked down at Rusty, who sat patiently beside him with his tail wagging despite the chaos around them. The old dog had led him to a treasure after all, but not the one either of them had expected to find. The broken cowboy was whole again, not because he had found buried gold, but because he had found people worth fighting for and a cause worth defending. Sometimes the most valuable treasure is the one you create by standing up for what's right, even when the odds are against you. 6 months later, Cole McBride stood on the porch of his rebuilt trading post, watching the sunrise paint the mountains gold, while Rusty dozed contentedly at his feet. The old dog moved a little slower these days, his muzzle whiter than before, but his eyes still held the intelligence that had changed both their lives. The building behind them bore little resemblance to the ramshackle structure Cole had inherited. Using funds from the mineral rights and water claims that Tom Crawford had been right about, Cole had transformed the property into something Jeremiah Stone would have been proud of, a legitimate trading post that served as the commercial heart of a growing community. Cedar Ridge itself had changed dramatically since the defeat of Victor Kane's criminal network. New businesses had opened, honest families had moved in, and the railroad survey teams that visited monthly spoke optimistically about bringing the transcontinental line through the territory within 5 years. The legal documents Cole had filed in the territorial capital had proven even more valuable than Stone's buried gold might have been. Water rights to the creek that supplied the valley, mineral claims covering thousands of acres, and development agreements with 3 different railroad companies had made Cole wealthy beyond his modest dreams. But more importantly, they had given him the resources to build something lasting. Thinking deep thoughts again? Rebecca asked, emerging from the trading post with 2 cups of coffee and the morning mail. Cole accepted his coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. Real coffee. Shipped in from San Francisco at considerable expense, was one of the luxuries his new wealth afforded. But the simple pleasure of sharing it with Rebecca on a peaceful morning was worth more than any treasure. "Just thinking about how much has changed," he replied, scanning the letters she had brought. Most were business correspondence, orders from suppliers, inquiries from potential settlers, reports from the various enterprises his mineral claims had made possible. But one letter was different. It bore the seal of the territorial government and was addressed in the formal language of official business. Inside was news that made Cole's hands tremble as he read. "What is it?" Rebecca asked, seeing his expression. "A full pardon," Cole said quietly, "from the territorial governor, for any actions I might have taken in defending my property against criminal elements operating outside the law. It also formally recognizes my legal ownership of all claims originally filed by Jeremiah Stone." Rebecca smiled. "You're officially respectable now, Mr. McBride." "God help me," Cole replied with a grin. "What's a reformed outlaw supposed to do with respectability? Marry a schoolteacher and settle down to raise a family?" Cole nearly choked on his coffee. "Rebecca Hayes, are you proposing to me?" "I'm suggesting that a man of property ought to have a wife who can keep his books and teach his children to read." It wasn't the most romantic proposal Cole had ever heard, but it was practical, honest, and came from a woman whose courage had helped save his life and his community. In other words, it was perfect. "I accept," he said solemnly, "on one condition." "What's that?" "Rusty has to give his approval. He found me this treasure. I figure he ought to have some say in how I use it." They looked down at the old dog, who opened one brown eye, studied them for a moment, then thumped his tail once against the porch boards before returning to his nap. "I think that's a yes," Rebecca observed. The wedding took place 3 weeks later, in front of the newly completed Cedar Ridge Community Center that Cole's wealth had helped fund. Martha Hendricks officiated, Tom Crawford served as best man, and half the territory seemed to attend. Even the reformed members of Jake Garrett's gang, the ones who had survived the final battle and chosen honest work over outlawry, showed up to wish them well. But the moment Cole treasured most came after the ceremony, when he and Rebecca walked back to their property together. Rusty led the way, moving with renewed vigor, as if he understood that his family was now complete. "Any regrets?" Rebecca asked as they reached the porch. Cole looked around at the community they had helped save, at the honest prosperity that was beginning to flourish in the valley, at the woman beside him whose love had helped heal wounds he thought would never close. About what? About the treasure, the gold that got blown up in the final battle. "We could have been rich beyond imagination." Cole considered the question seriously. The destroyed treasure chest had contained enough wealth to buy a small kingdom. Instead, they had modest prosperity, meaningful work, and the respect of their neighbors. "I think," he said finally, "that Jeremiah Stone would approve of how things worked out. His real treasure wasn't the gold he buried. It was the foundation he laid for honest people to build something worthwhile." Rusty barked once, as if agreeing with the assessment. As the sun set over their valley, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that rivaled any treasure chest, Cole reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. A year ago, he had been a broken man with nothing to lose. Today, he was a husband, a community leader, and the guardian of a legacy that would benefit generations to come. The dog who had started it all by digging in the right place at the right time settled onto the porch between Cole and Rebecca. His work finally done. He had found his human a treasure worth more than gold. He had found him a home, a purpose, and a future worth fighting for. In the end, that was the greatest treasure of all. Not the gold that could be stolen or the silver that could tarnish, but the bonds between people who choose to stand together against the darkness. The broken cowboy had inherited more than just a junk station and an old dog. He had inherited the chance to become the man he was meant to be. And sometimes, Cole reflected, as he held his wife's hand and listened to Rusty's contented breathing, that's worth more than $20 million buried in the ground. The frontier was still dangerous, still full of men who would take what wasn't theirs if given the chance, but Cedar Ridge had learned to protect its own. And at the heart of that protection sat a former drifter, his schoolteacher wife, and an old dog whose loyalty had uncovered the greatest treasure of all, the knowledge that some things are worth fighting for no matter the cost. The broken cowboy's story was complete, but his legend was just beginning.